Government's renewed Hope Housing program does not see housing as a social service alone, but as a powerful engine of economic transformation and inclusive growth. The Minister of Housing and Urban Development made this known during the Southwest Housing and Construction Program held in Abeokuta. TVC News Kazim Olowe was there.
As part of efforts to promote sustainable housing, the federal government has finalized plans to establish building materials manufacturing hubs across the country's 6 geopolitical zones. The Minister of Housing and Urban Development, Ahmed Dangiwa, made this known while speaking on Renewed Hope Housing, driving regional growth at the Southwest Housing and Construction Program held in Abeokuta. He said each of the hubs will help to localize production, reduce import dependence, lower cost, and create jobs. He explained that the ministry is ready to work hand in hand with the state government, investors, and professionals to unlock the potential of housing as a driver of jobs, industry, and prosperity.
We have commenced with over 10,000 housing units currently in 17 states and FCT. We are creating more than 250,000 direct and indirect jobs. To build houses sustainably, we must also build the industries that supply them. That's why the ministry is establishing building materials manufacturing hubs, one in each geopolitical zones of the country.
The Federal Ministry of Labour and Employment has been supporting and will continue to support any initiative aimed at boosting employment.
The convener of the program emphasized the importance of construction training school and artisan market initiatives, noting that it will facilitate positive development for the country.
Increased employability and job creations and artisans, improved construction quality and productivity, enhanced industry academia.
The president of the Nigerian Institute of Building, who was represented at the occasion, appealed to professionals to work together, adding that Southwest can be a model for housing-led development.
With its natural resources, the Southwest can become a hub for innovative, cost-effective, and sustainable building materials.
Some of the newly trained artisans were welcomed by the minister and other stakeholders in attendance. Experts in the built industry have agreed to collaborate with government in ensuring that the regional housing development is properly achieved through the Renewed Hope Housing project in the country. Kazim Olowe, TVC News, Abeokuta.
The House of Representatives has expressed deep concern over overlapping regulatory powers, procedural loopholes, and rising investor anxiety surrounding the implementation of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission Digital, Electronic, Online, or Non-Traditional Consumer Lending Regulations of 2025. The resolution followed the adoption of a motion of urgent public importance sponsored on Tuesday by Honorable Nnamdi Ezechi, who represents Udokwa Ukwani Federal Constituency of Delta State. He warned that unless urgent steps are taken to clarify the existing regulatory landscape, the country risks undermining one of its fastest growing financial technology sectors. The digital lending industry has become a major driver of financial inclusion, innovation, and economic growth. However, the current regulatory confusion is creating what he calls unnecessary friction. He says if we do not act now, we risk pushing investors away, stifling innovation, and eroding public confidence in this critical sector, end quote. The lawmaker explained that while the FCCPC regulations were designed to curb predatory lending practices and improve transparency in Nigeria's digital credit space, their implementation has been marred by jurisdictional conflicts and inconsistent directives from various regulatory bodies. It says instead of providing clarity and consumer protection, we're now dealing with a situation where multiple agencies are issuing overlapping compliance requirements, and this has left operators confused and slowed the growth of a sector that holds immense potential for the economy. Honorable Ezechi specifically pointed out that agencies such as the Central Bank of Nigeria, Nigerian Communications Commission, Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, NIPC, and the Association of Licensed Telecom Operators of Nigeria, ALTON, have all issued separate directives relating to the same regulations. a development he described as counterproductive and also unsustainable. Let's bring in Ayodele Adio, his MD Adio Strategy and Communications, for more on this development. Mr. Ayodele, this House resolution speaks to a growing tension between regulation and innovation. Precisely how do you think we can go beyond just the narratives? How do we ensure that this kind of regulatory overlap does not damage investor confidence? And what kind of signals do you think this is sending to global fintech players looking at Nigeria?
Well, first of all, thank you, Nifemi. First of all, there is no tension between innovation and regulation in this particular instance. And it's a bit surprising because the same bill that the honorable member seems to be criticizing or critiquing, passed through the House of Representatives just about a year ago. And the same bill was passed and assented to. And if there were issues at the time, you would have expected that, the said honorable member would have raised these issues at the time, and those issues would have been dealt with at the stage of perhaps the public hearing stage or before it eventually got passed by the National Assembly. But that did not happen at the time. So clearly what you're seeing is that there are intense lobbying behind the scene to ensure that some of the provisions of that bill do not see the light of day. And these are very, very important regulatory provisions that are not going to stifle the place, but actually open the space up to not just competition, but to even more investment in that particular sector. And I touch on three things that are very critical in that bill because of, lack of time. The first is the fact, like you rightfully mentioned in your introduction, that the bill seeks to curb predatory lending practices by many of these unscrupulous, lending organizations that, seem not to be able to follow the rule of law in the application of loans. First, they did not declare publicly interest rates. And second, the manner in which they disburse and collect these loans flagrantly disregards the rule of law and borderline dehumanizes many Nigerians. And this regulation seeks to curb that. But even more importantly, there are two things that this regulation seeks to achieve. One is the fact that this lending space, particularly that driven by telcos, delivered about 48 billion in profit to one of these telco organizations whose partner in delivering this particular service is a South African company where there is absolutely no value tied to our local economy, which means the entire value created from this entire lending process obviously is domiciled back in South Africa without any benefits residual here in Nigeria. And what that regulation seeks to address is to say that every telco that will be engaging in lending practices in Nigeria must also partner with an extra Nigerian-owned fintech company to deliver that particular service.
I hear you clearly, Mr. Adio. Allow me to jump in, though, because the Honorable also raised important issues like multiple regulators, the CBN, NCC, FCCPC, NIPC, and others, issuing sometimes conflicting directives. You don't think this points to a deeper institutional coordination problem in our policy ecosystem?
So first of all, we can deal with the coordination issue, and that has been a bane in our economy for such a long time. But in this particular issue, there is already clarity, which I was trying to establish, and there's absolutely no confusion, because the key elements, in this regulation, just simply seeks an opportunity for local players and local fintech companies that are Nigerian-owned and Nigerian-based to participate in the lending process. And to gain in the market share, which obviously will stimulate our local economy, and of course, it will create jobs. Another important component is that these telcos have refused to share significant data with organizations like the Credit Corps, which is a major drive of this current administration or the president's ambition to pursue a credit economy. So, for instance, you have millions of people who borrow data and who borrow credit from these telcos. And that data isn't captured and shared with other major financial institutions, which means many of these peoples are not rated, their credit ratings are non-existent, and more importantly, you can't even have enough data to plan in terms of policy making, given the financial habits of millions of Nigerians. And so this regulation is saying, simply share this data with other financial, especially government-owned, financial institutions, so that there is data that helps, policy planning. And I do not see how in the world there's any overlap in this question, and how this, seems to be stifling investment, or how in any case.
I hear you clearly. Unfortunately, we've completely run out of time, but the conversation is on as to what a, harmonized regulatory framework for digital lending should look like if Nigeria wants to sustain the fintech leadership, like we see in countries like Kenya and South Africa. But we'll have to continue this subsequently. Adele Adio, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.